Hello. Hello, everybody. Welcome to a fantastic cooking class here at Basics Market, where we're going to be looking at bao, some steamed buns. In this case, we're going to be making a pork bun recipe, and it should be tons of fun. If you have any questions during this class, you're welcome to send them to us via your little question button, and they will be relayed directly to me live during the class, and I will answer them as best I can, or we will try to search them up and what have you. And we can also get back to you via email if it's a very complicated question, which will take more research. So please utilize that, questions, comments, etc. All right, well, let's get cooking, right? So if you're cooking along with me, I figure there's sort of two ways we could go about that. And one is you're going to be making the dough, which we'll prepare first, and then kind of observing the filling, which you can do later on your own. Otherwise, maybe you've already gotten the recipe and made the dough, and so you'll be looking at, how we're going to be building the bao, and you can build them along with me after you make your filling with me. But either way, it should work out for you to cook along, or if you're just observing, that is wonderful also. So bao is a dumpling. It comes from China originally, and they've been around for over 1,000 years. The first record of the bao is from the 3rd century China, but from there, they've spread all over the world. And as of this, I think it was just this year, there's an a national bao day here in America, which was August 22nd. So just occurred. And so with Chinese immigrants all over the world, they brought this bao technology with them, and it caught on everywhere. And it, you can fill the bao with anything. So that's one of the things that's so neat about them. A great way to utilize little bits and pieces of vegetables, meat, and all kinds of seasonings. And you can even do dessert bao, chocolate, peanut butter and jelly, all kinds of stuff. So what I'd like to show you today is a great dough to make some bao, and a really nice pork filling utilizing some ground pork. We have really good pork at our markets, at all the Basics locations have beautiful meat markets where you can get all kinds of great organic meats, and they have ground pork fresh all the time. So that's a good source for that. So let's look at the dough. We want to get the dough going and get a rise. This is a yeasted dough, and it also uses a little bit of baking soda, so it's kind of double leavened to get a lot of nice fluff. So to start any sort of yeasted dough, you want tepid water or lukewarm water, and the best way to get your temperature right on the water is just to put your finger in it, or run the tap over your fingers, and when it's the same as your body temperature, that's the perfect temperature for yeast to take off as well. So we're going to use a medium bowl to start, and I'm just going to pour 2/3 of that warm water into the bowl, and then I have 2 teaspoons of active dry yeast. And this is approximately, or it is, 2 teaspoons is one of these little packets. If you're using the envelopes like that, or, just measure out 2 teaspoons. And this sort of dry yeast is, it's going to come to life. It's in stasis when it's dried. And then when you put it into the warm water, it actually comes back to life and starts to multiply, and that's how and as it breathes, that's how the air bubbles get into our bread. So yeast is pretty magical, and this sort of active dry yeast is a somewhat recent invention in the scheme of things. So back 1,000 years ago when bao were first being developed, they were probably using some form of like a sourdough fermented bread dough to get the rise effect. And so the bao come from northern China, where wheat instead of rice is the main crop. And that's how these bao came to be. So we've got our yeast going there. And so we're also going to add, to feed the yeast, 2 tablespoons of sugar. And I'm just going to put that right in there. And so this will take about 5 minutes or maybe even less to start bubbling. And that's what we call proof. And that's simply that. It's proof that your yeast is alive and well and starting to bubble and breathe. And that's a good step, and not totally necessary as far as the chemistry of the bread go. That yeast will catch up and start to activate, if it is legitimate yeast, whether you see it bubble or not. But it is good it's also good. I think it does help a little bit to get a head start and get that little bubble, and then to see that happen it's nice also. You've got good active yeast. So while that's happening, we'll get our dry ingredients together. So for this, we're using bread flour. Bread flour, you could use all-purpose flour also, but bread flour has the advantage of extra proteins and extra gluten, which will help hold these bao together as they're going to be steamed. And that's a pretty, pretty rigorous environment for a dough. So it really helps to hold everything together. So let's go ahead and measure out 1 3/4 1 3/4 cup of bread flour. So I'm going to go ahead and level. I have this as a handy thing anytime you're working with dough. It's really nice to have this as a pastry cutter or a pastry cutter. So we just skim off the top, and then you get a nice flat measure. And that's always a good idea with baking, to really get exact measurements. I always think of baking as a science, and you really want to get those measurements right. So here's a 1/2 cup. So I'm going 1 cup, a 1/2 cup, and a 1/4 cup to come to the grand total of 1 3/4 cup. So here's, yeah, yeah.
Can you use OO flour that you use for fresh pasta?
All right, so there we have our first question is about the flour, and the question is, can you use OO flour, which is that really great flour for like pizza dough or pasta. And what the double O flour is pretty neat, because it's a very fine milled flour, but it does have a high gluten content. So I think it actually would work here. I haven't tried that yet, but I'd say that's definitely worth a go. And also I've been working on getting a gluten-free bao dough recipe, and it's been tough. I've had my best luck just using the Bob's 1-to-1 with a little extra xanthan gum, and then baking them. I haven't gotten flour that I'm really, dough that I'm really happy steaming with the gluten-free yet, but we'll continue to work on that. Okay, so we have our 1 3/4 cup flour in there. And now we're going to go ahead and add a little salt. So just 1 teaspoon of kosher salt. The recipe, by the way, is available online. This recipe and many of our other recipes, basicsmarket.com. You can find a library of recipes. skills and videos, classes, past classes like this one. And also in our stores, we have these really pretty little recipe cards, which we give away, and they're on the walls in all the markets. And you can find the recipe there as well for these bao. Okay, so we've got the salt in there. And for this sort of thing, I like to use a whisk and just sort of whisk the salt in there. And then we've also got our baking soda, and that's just a 1/4 teaspoon of baking soda. So that baking soda is going to activate when it hits the steam and really give us a little extra poof. Okay, and it looks like our yeast is starting to activate. I can already see some little bubbles forming, so I know that that is good to go. So we can go ahead and drop that into our dry ingredients. And here you can use a spatula or you can use a wooden spoon. I prefer a wooden spoon for stirring dough. And then maybe we'll utilize a spatula to get it out of the bowl. And so we're going to go ahead and give this a little bit of a knead. So this recipe will make you 12 bao or baozi, which are these nice kind of palm-sized bao. This is a very forgiving dough, really nice to work with. One of my favorites, really. I'm always really happy with this dough. It holds up well. You can make it ahead of time and put it in the refrigerator to slow down the ferment on it, and so it will. When you put the dough in the refrigerator, the yeast slows down, and you can just punch it down maybe once or twice over a day, and then use it the next day even. So it's a really nice soft dough, soft yet sturdy enough to throw on in the steamer. So once I get it sort of gathered together with the spoon, I go in with my hand and just pick up any straggling dry bits and incorporate that into the dough. Oh yeah, and then of course I was like, this is a little dry, and that is because I forgot to add 1 tablespoon of oil. And I'd add that to my liquid ingredients. I got carried away, but I'm going to go ahead and cheat and just kind of knead it in, which will be a bit messy, but the dough, it won't, in the end, it's not going to matter a whole lot. But it's a lot easier to put that in with your liquid ingredients. So after that yeast has started to bloom, drop 1 tablespoon of neutral oil. So that can be a canola oil or a safflower oil, a sunflower oil, grapeseed oil. All these are neutral oils. So that just means that they don't have a lot of flavor coming along with them. So now I'm kneading. Now you can see once I got that oil in there, it absorbed all the dry bits. So that is good. Okay. So now you're going to want to put a little bit of flour down on a board or your counter and go ahead and knead. So with the kneading, just want to use the palm of your hand and sort of do a circular motion. And we're going to knead this until it becomes a smooth and elastic dough. So what you will start to feel it transforming, and it'll get a little bit glossy. And as you knead, you may want to put a little extra flour down, and that's just to keep the dough from sticking to the board. one of the origin stories, or the main origin story of the bao, has to do with a military leader in ancient China who was coming back from a battle, and he came to a raging river, and they couldn't get the army across this river, and they'd been battling, and there's a ragtag group tired from fighting, and they just couldn't get across the river, and there allegedly were angry river deities keeping them from crossing. And some of the locals said, well, you have to appease the river deity by feeding them 50 severed heads. And so this leader didn't want to do that. So instead, he had the soldiers make a bunch of dough and fill it with all kinds of good stuff. And they put the 50 head-like bao on a raft and put it out into the river and tricked the river deities into thinking they were heads, or maybe they enjoyed them more than eating heads because they're delicious bao, and then they were able to cross. So the original name of the bao is Mandao, which translates to barbarian's head, and now the mantao is this same sort of dough, but it doesn't have filling. And at some point, the filled dumpling became bao, and bao simply means a small basket bun, and mantao means head, or barbarian's head specifically. So I guess that is a strange name in Chinese foods, as usually the Chinese foods talk about the name deals with, you know, either the technique or the ingredient. But for whatever reason, these plain dough dumplings are called barbarian's head. So bao in China is eaten as a breakfast food a lot. And of course, a street snack all over the world. And they're great for any meal or appetizer or snack. Okay, so that's about what it takes to get a nice smooth dough. And you can kind of see how I've got some gloss going. And as soon as you can get a little bounce back on it, it's good to go. It has that elasticity, which will increase as it rises and you push it back down maybe once or twice. But you can see already it's a really workable dough, a lovely dough. Okay, so with the dough, we want to put it into a lightly oiled bowl. So again, just some neutral oil. Put a little on all around your dough ball. Go ahead and put it in a bowl. And we're going to be looking for this to double in size. And so I'm going to go ahead and cover it with plastic wrap, or you could use a plate, or you can use a damp towel for this also. If you're using the plastic wrap, one neat trick to see if it's doubled in size is you can take a pen like a Sharpie and draw a circle around the dough as it sits when you put it in there, and then you can see how large it grows. This dough will take an hour up to 2 hours at room temperature to double in size. So that is the dough. please ask any questions if you have questions about any of that. And I'm going to go ahead, while the dough is rising, you can make your filling. So let's do that. So this bench scraper is really nice for cleaning up flour messes and things like that, as well as you'll see for cutting the dough, working with the dough. So we'll just keep that to the side. Okay. So this filling is a pork-based filling. You could use any sort of meat. I like to do a vegetarian version of this, where I use 50% mushrooms and 50% tofu, so like 4 ounces each. And that makes a really good filling, just everything else the same. That's just replacing the protein. But I definitely encourage you to, after you get the technique of the bao, you know, to play around with fillings and stuff. There's the possibilities are endless, you know. So let's have a look. So I have a skillet here. This is just like a 10-inch skillet, which is good for just about everything. And I've got it preheated over medium heat. I have 8 ounces or half a pound of ground pork. You could also do this with a chopped up like diced pork. It would be another way to go. Or if you had like leftover pulled pork or a pork roast, you know, that would be really good for this also. And of course, if the meat is already cooked, I would just I'd just cook up my ginger and garlic and then throw in the cooked meat and then turn the heat off and add the rest of the ingredients. Okay, so what I'm going to do is prepare my garlic. So this is a Chinese technique that I was shown once, where you just leave the garlic cloves in some warm water and then take them out to peel them, and the peel comes off nice and easy, and it doesn't stick to your hands or the knife as much. So it's really good, especially if you're doing a lot of garlic. You don't have to deal with all that sticky peel. So you can see that comes off really well. And then, as always, like to have a little compost type bowl handy.
Tell me a couple of questions about the dough.
Yeah.
One person would like to know, do you overknead it? And the other person would like to know, someone would like to know, can you put it in the fridge overnight and take it out when you're ready to make the dough? If you could repeat those for the rest of the week, that'd be great.
All right. So we have a couple dough questions. One is, can you overknead the dough? And you know, I would say yes. But you probably won't, because you'll get tired. I know I would get tired before I actually overkneaded it, but eventually you can overknead any dough, and eventually a wheat dough will turn into wheat gluten. You'll get seitan. Eventually, as the gluten separates from the wheat, if you just keep kneading a bread or a dough and knead it, eventually the gluten comes out. And that's what seitan is, which is just the protein of the wheat. With this, I think, you know, you'll once it gets to that nice glossy finish, and where you poke it and it pops back, that's where you can stop. It's not a real hard knead on this one. So, you know, just it would be possible to overknead it, but I really feel you'll get tired before you get there. And or I do. And then the other question is, can you refrigerate it overnight? And the answer is yes. You just want, you know, you cover it. And what I like to do, if I have time with a dough. I'll let it develop once, you know, and maybe rise up to just about double in size, punch it down, and then put it in the refrigerator covered or in a Tupperware with a lid or something like that. And then it will overnight, by morning, it should have doubled again. And then you can bring it out, punch it down, and bring it back to room temperature and then work with it. And as I mentioned earlier in the class, this is a really forgiving dough and really nice to work with and very sturdy as far as, you know, refrigerating, pulling out. I've worked with this dough with a lot of classes, and I've done all kinds of crazy, like, you know, overnight refrigeration and different things I've had to do to facilitate mini dough balls, and it just bounces back every time. I really think it's a nice dough. Okay, so we've got our ginger started here, and I'm going to, garlic, and now I've got the ginger. So ginger is a really nice thing to add to any dish. It has a lot of health benefits, etc. And it tastes great and gives you a little spice, right? So we're going to use about a 1/2 inch or so part of the ginger. And so if it's organic ginger, you don't really have to peel it. But if you do want to peel it, a spoon is a great way to peel ginger. And you just want to use the side of the spoon and you can get that peel right off. And so the cheaper the spoon, the better. A cheap thin spoon will have that sharp edge that works great. And a lot of times, you know, ginger has a lot of crazy like contours, and here's a hand of ginger, right? And you can really get in there with the spoon. All right, so with the ginger and the garlic, you'll notice I sort of sliced it lengthwise first. And this is just for ease of mincing. Then I'll come back across, and I've got my claw, right? This is the claw hand where my fingers are tucked in and out of the way. And then when I've got my ginger and garlic in kind of a chop, then I can go through and mince it all really nice. And so my skillet is nice and hot here. So I'm going to go ahead, and here's a tablespoon of sesame oil. And then I've got the 8 ounces of pork. And we'll just kind of get that going. And continue to mince up the garlic ginger. Okay. Yeah, so we had a question about freezing the bao itself, or the dough, or what was it? The finished bao. Yeah, so once you assemble the bao bun, and before you steam it, they can be frozen, and you can just put them like on a sheet pan and put them in your freezer, and let them freeze solid, and then you can throw them in like a Ziploc bag or a Tupperware or something, and keep them in your freezer. And then when you're ready to cook them off, you can just put them frozen into your steamer, and they'll take a little bit longer, but they'll cook up just fine. All right, so what we're looking to do here is just cook the pork all the way through. Let the ginger and garlic kind of cook a little bit. And this cooked filling method is nice because then you don't have to worry about the meat being cooked thoroughly because we've already cooked it. And then your bao, once it's steamed, it's just ready to roll, right? Okay, so with that, we're going to, the pork is just about cooked through. It goes really quick, and that's kind of why I like to give it a wide surface because it'll cook very quickly that way. And once the pork is sort of brown, that's when it's ready to go. It'll give off some oil, and you can either just leave that because we're going to be adding a sauce which was going to consolidate all that, or you could drain that off if you don't want so much oil in the filling. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and put the this is white pepper, and for this recipe, I actually, when I wrote this recipe, I don't know what I was thinking about the white pepper. I actually think to start with half the amount there, so I think I have a half teaspoon of white pepper, and I think a quarter teaspoon is plenty. It can be, it's good, it's spicy, you know, but you can hold back. And I tend to maybe add a little more ginger, a little less white pepper, but this is where you'll have to find your personal taste. And again, with the chili flakes, maybe start with half a teaspoon, 3/4 teaspoon of chili flake or chili oil. Here, got some chili flakes, and we can and you could use a chili oil here also, or even just like a sriracha, whatever you've got on hand, any sort of chili sauce, things like that would be great here. I don't, since the pork is giving off some oil, I'm actually sort of creating a chili oil by dropping those chili flakes right into the pan, and they're getting cooked up in the naturally occurring oil and a little bit of that sesame oil. So we've got chili oil right there. And then otherwise, let's have a look. We're going to make a what's called a slurry, and a slurry is when you add cornstarch to a liquid. This liquid is, I have 2 tablespoons of tamari, and I have a teaspoon of cornstarch. And what this will do is sort of thicken up our mixture here and get it to hold together. And so with the slurry, you're just looking to break up all that cornstarch in whatever liquid you're using. And so a whisk is a good deal to do that. And you just want to smooth that out. And then there's your slurry. So this is just tamari. You could use soy sauce. You could use liquid aminos. You could use cocoa aminos, whatever, you could use low sodium soy sauce, whatever you would like. But you just want that 1 teaspoon of cornstarch in there. And then we have half a tablespoon of sugar, which we're going to add to that as well. And then we're just going to stir that into our deal here. And I have the heat off, but the pan is still warm enough that this should set up. But you could put the heat back on for a moment if it's not coming together, but that's usually enough heat, residual heat, that the cornstarch will activate and start to thicken up. All right, so you can see how it's thickened up quite a bit there. And now I have 1 tablespoon of hoisin sauce, or you could use oyster sauce, would be another yummy thing to put here, or plum sauce would be good. Any of those kind of nice thick Chinese like condiments would work well for this. And that'll just juice it up a little further. And then we're going to look at scallions. So I've got scallions, also known as green onions, and we want about half a cup of sliced. So it's usually, depending on the size of the scallion, it'll be from 2 to 4. So you just want to take the root end off, and then I'll often clip the very end of the greens too, because sometimes those are a little raggedy. And then with the scallion, we're always looking to take off, when you clean them, you take off an outer leaf or so and give them a rinse, and then they're ready to go. And I've done that with these already. So I start at the white end and just slice them thin. And then I'm going to go up and down, and the grip on my blade, I hold the knife with right where the handle meets the blade. And that's the most ergonomically easy way to hold a knife if you're using it a lot. And I just use the handle to sort of balance. Okay, so sort of a thinly sliced scallion there, and it's almost half a cup. Do one more. So this with this size scallion, it's going to end up to be 3 each. And again, you could add, I was right before the class, I was thinking cilantro would be kind of tasty in these. Some cilantro. Okay, so there's half a cup and a couple extra for good measure. And then you just want to mix those in, and they should stick right to the pork because we have all that nice ooey gooey stuff there. And then you can transfer your mixture here to a bowl. And I happen to have some made up here already, cooled a little bit, just because it's, you could start working with it right away. But if you do let it cool a tad, just really for as long as it takes to, well, in this case, since I have some dough ready to go, as long as it takes for me to mess around with this dough, it'll be cool enough to work with. But I have some already cooled here. Okay, so to assemble, let's get down to the good stuff, right? So I've got my dough and it's doubled. This is a dough I made previous to the class earlier today. And you can see it's become nice and soft and real puffy. And I did put it in the refrigerator for a little while because I made it this morning, let it rise, covered it, let it rise, and then punched it down, put it in the refrigerator. And here it is again, brought it out back to room temperature and let it rise again. So this is my dough. Now this is a steamed dumpling. You can bake these also. And if you were to bake them, you just lightly oil a baking sheet and put them in the oven at like 350, 375. You could put a little glaze, like maybe a little egg wash on them, so they brown off nice. And then you get that kind of crispy dumpling. But what we're doing tonight is a steamed dumpling. So these steamer baskets, such as this, are really nice for the dumplings, for the bao. And I have lined it with some parchment paper, which I cut into a circle to fit. And with these, this does have 2 levels, and they often do. But for these, I really like to just use 1 level, because I find unless you switch the levels halfway through cooking, one gets more cooked than the other, and it's kind of tricky. So I'll just use the 1 level here. And then I like to use the wok instead of a flat pan, because it sort of protects my basket from this sort of thing. But this happened to me anyway, and I'm not sure how, but if I'm pretty good at setting things on fire, it turns out. So I have a little bit of water down here, and I'm just going to get that to a nice roaring boil to create steam. And then we have our basket, which I'm going to set over the water. And to get that going, I'll put the lid on, and we'll just get that moving along there. And actually, I'm just going to go with the lid, and we'll build our bow and then put them into this. And that seems like a pretty good idea, yes, right? And okay, so you can, in a basket like this, you can fit about 6 bow on one level. So again, we're going to put a little bit of our bread flour down, take the ball of dough, and make a snake. And you just want a nice even long length. And then something you can cut into 12 pieces, and each of those pieces will be turned into one bow. And again, this is where this bench knife comes in handy, dough scraper or bench knife it's called. And but you could just use a regular knife also. So what I like to do is cut it in half and then half again. So I have 4 equal pieces, and then I'll cut each of those pieces into 3, and then that should be 12. And so this is the Baozi size, which again, it's just this sort of palm size. You can make larger bow, you can make smaller bow. It is all up to you, but this is sort of a nice medium size. And then you want to roll each of those 12 pieces into a ball. And it doesn't have to be perfect. These are going to rise a little bit too. And it really is nice if you have the time to give these a chance to rise, like for at least 5 minutes or so, just so the dough kind of fluffs up again, and it makes it a little easier to roll out. And because of the constraints of the class, time-wise, I'm going to rush it a little bit, and these, since this dough has had such a nice long rise, it feels pretty good. And then at this juncture also, you can kind of like feel like I can tell this is a little heavier than maybe this one over here. So I'll sort of piece stuff together and try to get the dough balls to be as equal in size as I can. And if you really wanted to get serious, you could weigh each ball out, but that would be very technical. Okay, then you can use your plastic wrap or your tea towel or your damp tea towel to cover the dough balls while you make your bow. So again, a little bit of flour. And then we're going to be putting 1 tablespoon of filling into each bow. Okay, so we have our ball. And what I'm going to do is just press it down on that floured surface. And then you can use a rolling pin to flatten and get a disc shape. And you can also, once you kind of get that disc shape going, kind of pull, and one sort of trick with this is to not let the edges get too thick, because when you roll like that, what happens is the dough gets pressed out to the edges, and then you get this thick edge, And then when you go to do your top, right, you end up with a big glob of dough on the top. So what I like to do is with my fingers, kind of pull those edges so they're actually thinner than the inside a little bit, because I know that I'm going to be pinching them together and it's going to become quite thick. So that's just a little something I've learned. And so I always am watching the edges, and also by going around and sort of pinching them, it helps get your circle a little bit. Okay, so I've got kind of a rough circle, which is going to work for me for this one. And I've got a tablespoon of filling, and I'm just going to pop that tablespoon of filling right in the center of the circle. And then we're going to gather it up, and I'm just going to work right off the board here, and I'm going to make some folds, and I'm just folding around. And there's different, like I think it was the traditional number of folds is like 18 or something, and that's really good luck, I guess. And I think I got about 12 there, so it's okay luck. And then you give it a little twist and a pinch, and then you have your little dumpling. And it's like a pumpkin, right? A little mini pumpkin. And then I put that in my basket for steaming, and you can see the steam is happening now. So that's good. I've got that cranked up on high. And so one thing while you're doing this, you may have to refill the water more than once. So keep an eye on your water level. I have some water at handy in case I need to put more water underneath. Okay, now I can tell already that this second dough ball is easier to work with just from the couple minutes of sitting there. It's much softer, and you can see how it's going into a circular shape a lot easier than that first one that I was sort of fighting with. Now it's starting to relax, and as it relaxes, I find myself relaxing, and now I can really enjoy this. The first one just was not cooperating. So I really would encourage you to give it that 5-minute rest period once you form the ball, because boy, it makes a big difference. Okay, and with that being said, yeah, real easy to pinch around the sides and get it a little bit thinner around the sides. And then once again, you scoop out a tablespoon of filling, and that goes right in the center. And anytime you're working with dough like this, it's not a bad idea to just keep a little flour on your fingers to help it from sticking. And once again, you're just gathering and folding in, and folding all the way around, gathering, and then a good pinch and a twist. Okay, and then that one goes in the basket. And so it's important to get the pinch the top, or they will open up on top. And let's do another one. So get your circle rolled out. And, you know, if I am okay at this, I think, but I've seen, you know, there's people who make thousands of these, and I'll try it. You can make it right in your palm. Let me give it a go. Remember though, I'm working without a net here, so anything could happen. Yeah, see, I just don't have the manual dexterity to work off of my hand, but I'm sure some of you out there do. But again, it's that same concept of making all those folds. Yeah, this, I need to work on that, but then you fold and gather and pinch, and the result is actually not too bad. So throw that in the old basket. So there's those three. And let's go ahead and pop those in and get them steaming so we can see what they look like. So go ahead and, if you would, take a look at the size there. And this is really where the magic happens, as they should puff up a bit for us. So while those are steaming, I'll just continue to make some more bao. And hopefully you're right there at home doing the same thing. So I think that there's no reason not to make bao. It's really easy. And once you get your timing down, as far as like the dough, which again is very forgiving, you can make it a day ahead. You can make it in the morning, put it in the refrigerator, pull it out for evening. You can make the bao up to this stage where we're filling and crimping, and then freeze them, and then just bring them out whenever you want a snack. You can bake them or steam them. You can fill them with anything you want. Again, a great place for some odds and ends or leftovers, and a really good way to stretch out proteins. Like for all these 12 bao, it's only half a pound of pork, so very affordable. You can really stretch it with vegetables. And again, mushroom tofu 50-50 is a really good vegetarian filling. And everyone who eats these bao really enjoys it. So I think it's a great thing to learn to do. Yeah.
If they put the steamed bao in the fridge, how many days can they stay in the fridge before they use it?
All right, so we had a question as to how long can the finished cooked or steamed bao last in the refrigerator after they're cooked. So if you put them in there, they're cooled, and then covered. I'd say, a good 3 days. It's probably a good amount before I think your bao dough will get a little hard, crusty, but you could bring it back by popping it again in the steam and bringing it back to life a little bit. But I think 3 days is probably good, good amount of time on these. So we have a question as to how long to bake them. So in the steamer here, we want to go about it's usually 7 to 9 minutes to finish in the steamer. If you're baking them at about 350 to 375 degrees, somewhere in there, you're looking at 15 minutes or so. Really just till that when the dough, it will puff up also in the oven, and then it will get golden brown and should be a little bit crispy on the outside if you're baking them. And I'd say 15 minutes or so will be a good amount of time. And so there's another one. So we have a question about what the temperature on your steamer is, or on your stovetop, so to speak. So I just turn it all the way up. I mean, every stove is a little different. I make these a lot on a gas stovetop, and thus the wok comes in handy because you have the flame coming up around the side, and you can see I've already set this handle on fire because I had the flame cranked up so much. So you want a lot of steam, and whatever it takes to get there on your stove, it could be, if you can get a comfortable amount of steam going on medium, then that's a good place to be. I have this is an induction burner I have to work with for our classes, and I just have it cranked up all the way because it takes a little bit more energy to create the heat that we want, the BTUs, right? So that's where I just want a lot of steam, and that's what's happening. And so you can see they've grown a bit. And so I'm going to grab a pair of tongs because my instinct is always to reach in there and grab one, but steam is very hot, and that's a terrible burn, and it hurts. So I'm not going to do that to myself this time. So with your tongs, if you just want to check where the bow are at, you can pull one out, and once it gets dry to the touch and really nice and fluffy, they're ready. Now, these are super close. It's still just a little tacky, so I am going to give it another minute or so, and we have a few more minutes of the class, so that's perfect. I'll be able to demonstrate how to shove it in your mouth before the class is over, hopefully. So now this dough, with all that jabbering away, is perfect. Okay, so I mean, now we've got fluff back, and you can see the difference here as to that first dough ball that I was trying to roll out, and I was like, and now it just wants to turn into a disc, a nice circle for me. And I could just do this with my fingers, but if I wanted to be fancy, I'll use the rolling pin. And, but it's just a very nice supple dough, if you will. And yeah, again, just working around that edge to get a thin edge. And you can see, I'm going about 4 to 5 inches in diameter for this size bow. You want it thin, but not so thin. If you get the dough too thin, your filling's going to kind of wiggle out of there.
So specifically, somebody would like to know how long do they steam?
Yeah. So we have a question. How long to steam them, and it is about 7 to 9 minutes total. Again, it sort of depends on how your steamer basket is, and a few variables, but it's usually just in there, 7 to 9 minutes. And let's check them right now. In fact, I think we're in that time zone. So let's have a look. So what you'll see as they are, this is a kung fu move to get the steam out of the way. They've grown quite a bit, right? Just about doubled, I would say. And it's no longer tacky, so they feel dry. And that's where I want them. And you can see, I'll get it up close for you. And they make great gifts for jugglers. A snack you can juggle with, or if you can juggle, which I can't, but I certainly would juggle these. So these are done. So that's about how long it takes for this setup here. And again, if you're utilizing, if you're, kind of, you want to do a bunch at a time and you want to utilize the double basket, I would suggest carefully switching halfway through the timing, switch the top to the bottom, and then you'll get a more even steam that way. So.
Good question, final question, how can we improvise if we don't have a steamer?
Oh, thank you. So we have one final question, and it's a good one and something I definitely meant to touch upon. If you don't have a bamboo steamer or I actually have an aluminum steamer at home, which I enjoy because I can't catch it on fire, but the aluminum metal steamers tend to sweat a lot. They have a lot of condensation. And so actually in a bow class, we worked it out that if you have one of those aluminum steamers, you want to put a parchment on top of your bow as well. And then that helps from the condensation dripping down on them. But the question here is, how do you improvise a steamer if you don't have the equipment? Use like a sieve is a good, or a colander can work. If you have a flat like sifter kind of deal, that's even better, or any sort of perforated pan type thing, and then set that in another pan. Sometimes like I have a vegetable steamer kind of deal that's, it's smaller. It's just for like steaming broccoli or something, but that'll work. You can fit a couple bow, pretty much anything that has holes like this, that's perforated and that you can fit in another pot. Here we have the wok, but any sort of pot that will hold water will do, that you can fit that steam, that whatever perforated deal on. And again, a colander is a good way to go. Anything like that, or a sifter, set it over and then cover it with some sort of domed lid, or a lid that will allow your bow to rise up. So without further ado, let me eat this. So yeah, let's break it open and see what we've got inside. So that's what it's looking like inside. You can see we've got a pretty good even distribution. It's not too top heavy, like I was talking about, getting that nice pinch around. I really like to eat these with like a dipping sauce, even just soy sauce, or a little soy sauce, sriracha, and honey mixed together is really nice. Hoisin sauce is good. Any sort of dipping sauces you like, chili sauce, whatever you enjoy. These will be good to dip in. Let me take a bite and make sure that they taste good. It tastes good too. All right. Yum. I would take a bow, but I already did. Okay. All right. So I would like to, that's it for this class. We have a lot of fun classes coming up. Next Wednesday, the 22nd, we're going to look at cardamom pound cake and a couple toppings for that. That's a really delicious cake as we get into fall. Utilize some of those, some of that fall produce and so forth. And then the following Wednesday, the 29th, was an eggs 101. And we're going to look at all kinds of things to do with eggs and talk a little bit about eggs, and, very important source of food, right? And then after that, on the 6th of October, Lindsay, our nutritionist, will be looking at roasting chicken 3 ways. And then after that, we're doing a chili and cornbread seminar. And then And then following that on the 20th of October is a Saag paneer recipe. And we'll be looking at how to make paneer from scratch, which is Indian farmer's cheese, and then turn it into a lovely dish to enjoy. So thank you so much for joining me this evening and talking a little bit about BOW. I am with Basics Market, and we have 4 locations around the Portland area, one on Sandy Boulevard in Northeast Portland, one in Hillsdale on Capitol Highway, and one downtown on 13th and Lovejoy. And then we have a meat market on Canyon Road in Beaverton. So please go to any of those locations, pick up your ground pork and all your veggies for these lovely BOW, and give it a go. And I hope you enjoyed this as much as I did. And please have a wonderful rest of your evening and week. And I'll see you next week. And until then, happy cooking